I was fortunate enough to be presenting my trunk show to a quilt guild, and one of the big things they do at that guild for philanthropy are fidget quilts. And I thought, what is a fidget quilt? Well, I'll show you. Let's get started. Fidget quilts are a great way to bless those folks in your lives that may have something like Alzheimer's, dementia, ADHD, ADD, something where they need to keep their minds and their hands busy at all times. Kind of like me, I guess, right? I love to fidget. So what we have for you today is we have a fantastic printable, and that's just right there in the link below, and it shows you the layout of my quilt and talks to you about a lot of the different objects we're going to put together in the quilt. But before we even start today's lesson, let's think safety, right? I want you to think about the person you're going to be blessing with this quilt, and I want you to think about what their needs are and what they want to play with, and make sure it's safe and it's washable while you're picking the notions out of your notions drawer, right? So I chose this really cool cafe print from Wilmington. It's a 5x5 square and there's about 40 pieces in it. But you don't want your background to get all that large. So I did a 5x7. You could even go smaller if you want. Remember, very portable. You want to keep these handy. So what you're going to first do is you're going to take your squares, right, and you'll just start laying them out in an order where you like the way the colors go. But I want you to set about 5 or 7 aside at least, because I'm going to teach you to make prairie points. I'm going to show you some pockets and some zippers and all kinds of things. So we're going to need a few extra squares to work with. So you just go ahead and build out all of your pieces that you're going to use, the 5x7, and then let's get involved in creating the actual fidgets, we'll call them. Now, I addressed each fidget individually, but I constructed the quilt in a series of columns. So I'm going to show you first right here how to handle the burlap for the texture, but we're going to put everything together in these seams across here as the quilt goes, and then we'll sew the columns together, okay? So in doing that, like I said, I chose burlap because it's got a wonderful texture. And again, I'm making a quilt here for my grandfather. I want it to be masculine looking. I want it to be somewhat sophisticated looking. So I'm also choosing colors that are appropriate. So the burlap is a great texture. So I made a couple 5-inch slices. One of them I folded in half and I simply captured, as you can see here, into the seam allowance so that it was something that could be lifted and played with. The other version I did, I simply took and made a loop where this was stitched in on both seam allowances. And that's why having all of your layout designed first is important, so I know which squares are going where. So that's how I handled my burlap, and it was very simple. Here you see them in the quilt again. There's the 3-dimensional loop, and here's the loop where you can just slide your hand underneath and play with, but it's connected on both sides. Speaking of loops, there's something else that was really fun on here. On these, I used a standard satin ribbon and I just made different sizes of loops and I pinned those in place so that I could catch them later, right? But over here, I have what look to be the same length of loops, but I'm also trying to stretch the mind and stretch some of the loops. One of them is elastic, one of them is smooth and satin, the other one is rough and grosgrain. So I'm trying to, like I said, keep the person thinking that is playing with it. What is exciting about this? When I stretch on here, what happens? So if I come down here to this other piece of elastic, I've got a lot more give. I've got a lot more things I can do with this as I fidget about. Another thing you can do with your ribbons or your rickracs, both are great for fidget quilts, is I love these like 3D woven pieces. So this, I just caught those in the seam allowances as I went around. But right here, I actually top stitched them down in the same woven fashion, but I made those ones wonky. So I'm thinking about layout and I'm thinking about construction. What is different to me now about this loop than is different to me about this loop? So those were a lot of fun as I went through, okay? And so again, grosgrain ribbon, satin ribbon, rickrack is awesome, right? The rickrack I used sometimes just on a corner to corner, so it was elevated, right? This rickrack I stitched down the center so you could play with it, but you couldn't get your fingers underneath it. And this rickrack I stitched one on top of the other, the micro on top of the medium so you can see both colors. And a final piece of rickrack. Remember, you're giving them lots of things to look at. I have 1, 2, 3 pieces just stitched down so you can play with them, but you can't get your hands underneath them. constantly challenging the mind, right? Now, I thought this was really going to be fun. Again, thinking for Grandpa, you know, he likes construction and stuff. So this was the end of this tape, which was literally a plastic measuring tape that I got for next to nothing. Now, the problem was I didn't test it. And so, like I said, safety first. When I put the iron next to this, it started to melt. So when I made this section down here, I wanted to get some numbers into the quilt. I used a strip of this tape, but in doing so, I couldn't iron. I had to kind of press by hand those seams. So if you're using something like this and it feels kind of odd, please test it. It may melt, and you want to be very careful if that happens that way, okay? Now, moving down the line, let's talk Prairie Points. Prairie Points and corners are super fun, and this is easy to make, but I wanted to have some objects here like large and small. So to create a Prairie Point, it's very easy. You simply will take, that's how we're going to put it in a second. You'll simply take your square like it is, and you're going to want your print sides out. So you're going to go look at your back side, and you're going to fold it here, and then fold it again. And at this point, what I normally would do is come right over here, and I'd grab myself an iron, and I'm going to set that down to press this, but I'll go ahead and just capture that pinked edge into the seam allowance later on. So here it was, and I just captured that pinked edge right there into this seam allowance down here, so that also could be added into the quilt. So like I said, sometimes you're building off of each square. So here was the Prairie Point. The next seam down, I added in some of that jumbo rickrack to catch that in there as well. Okay? Now, back to the Prairie Point. So I've got large ones, and I've also got small ones. And small ones are easy to make as well. You take your square, divide it into quarters, so you're going to get 4 that are about that size, right? Once that happens, fold it in half, right sides out. Then you're going to quarter fold it again. But these get kind of small, and in the quilt I had them going in both directions in the same square, again, for the visual interest of it. So once I pressed it like this, you can probably see here that I did a little bit of stitching on it just to hold it in place while I get it over and ready to go to the quilt, so that I can play with them in both the seams I'm creating and the column seams later. Here they are now. So you can see these were caught up. Those are those little Prairie Points next to the big Prairie Point. Again, what is the difference in my mind? What am I thinking about? What is this challenging me to do? Okay? So, a couple more things I'm dying to show you. Pockets. Pockets are super fun. I've got a pocket up here, and I've got a pretend looking pocket right here. So the way I did those was I bought some ready-made bias trim, but you most certainly could use one of your squares. It's going to be the right length. But for the first one, the pseudo pocket, I just took this trim and I stitched it right into that seam allowance like I've been doing all the other base construction. Okay? So that was easy, but then I cut off another 5-inch section because of my 5-inch squares, and I took one of those squares and I cut about 1.5 inches off the bottom, and then I just went ahead and I faced the top of that with the welting or the trim, and then I can stitch this on like this so that there will become this extra pocket right here that I can just go ahead and put my hands in. You could put all kinds of little treasures in there as well. You could even put a piece of elastic with like a key or something that comes out of there so that they have something to tuck back in and out of the pockets as you go. And then that little scrap piece, later on, I just folded it up, and back on the quilt, I made myself another little pseudo flap to play with, so that again, I would be thinking, is this ribbon? Is this a pocket? What's going on here? Now, can't forget Velcro on a fidget quilt, but I'm thinking, what about maybe if I'm going to go to church or I'm going to go to the library with this fidget quilt? So on my Velcro, I made my pieces completely removable so I could go ahead and stick those together, keep them in my pocket while my person that's fidgeting with this quilt can't make a bunch of noise, right? The Velcro itself was simply stitched down in place one piece at a time. So you can see here, and I put in the lighter color thread so you can see the stitching, that I just went ahead and stitched this down onto the square as if it were here. So take that, lay it out, stitch it down, take this, lay it out, stitch it down, and then later on, once it's into the quilt, is when you can put on your other pieces and make sure that everything fits. Don't put on your pieces first before you sew it in, because you might accidentally stitch those down and then you can't get inside of your Velcro. So the other halves of your Velcro will wait patiently while you continue building your fidget quilt, right? Now, we're getting to some of the favorite parts for me, zippers, and I've got a cool button to show you here in a minute too. Now, before I bounce into zippers, I just realized I forgot about some of the fun things, like a loop with a button on it. This was very, very easy to create. I just took a little piece of the paracord that we use at the end for the tie, and I put a couple of little beads on it, or this was just a big plastic washer. But the reason I chose plastic was washability. I didn't want anything metal in there. I didn't want something that might rust over time. So plastic is a great use for that. And that was just caught right there in the seam as I was building those sections as well. Now, zippers. And I have been accused of playing an awfully unfair trick, right? But here was my zipper. I have created a zipper in here that has a full pocket that I can get in, and I can see, and I could put stuff, maybe even an identification or something like that in there if I needed, and zip it closed. Back to the challenge mentally though, I wanted to think, so here is a zipper that has no head on it and it's top stitched down, so that a person might consider, what are the differences between these zippers? Why can I unzip one and not the other? To keep their minds sharp and fresh. So, first of all, the easy zipper, take a scrap left over from the zipper you're going to sew in proper. That was the other end of it there. And I simply just took my square and I stitched it across on both sides. And then again, later on, when these get slayed like here, like right sides together, that'll capture that perfectly and cover up that end. And there's no reason to sew the zipper closed because it's not going to come open either, right? The other zipper, the working zipper, we want to go ahead and sew it in place. So the first thing you're going to do is take one of your 5-inch squares, split it in half, 2.5 inches and 2.5 inches. Now, I've got a little chunk of zipper. I can even show you with this one here quick. The first construction, right sides together. So you're going to go right sides together like this, and I'm going to stitch right along here, as you can see that I've done on this one. Once that's done and flipped over, as you can see I've now done here, you're going to go ahead and press this with your iron. So you come over here and don't pull the head all the way off the zipper. But you come in here, you get yourself a nice little press. And then as you can see that I've already done here, I went ahead and top stitched ever so lightly right along the top edge of that to secure it. It helps the zipper work better. And then once that whole thing was constructed, then I went ahead and laid it right sides up, and set it into my patchwork background, so that here I have, there's that zipper as you just saw, and when I open it up, I have the right sides of another piece of fabric showing through. So it's a very easy way to practice your zippers as well, and if you buy a long enough zipper, you can use the extra, as I said, for that other little part. Now, something else that I really enjoyed putting together here was this pocket button flap. So what I've done is I've got a piece of elastic in here, and I did it in case you don't have a buttonhole creatable machine at home, or if this just makes more sense. This button can go around this, or excuse me, this loop goes around this shank button, like yay. But in order to do it, what we've done here, kind of like the Prairie Points, is I've taken one of my big 5-inch squares and I folded it right sides together, and up inside of here is the elastic with the loop already formed and pointing up to the flat end, and I've pinned it in place. What I will then do is I will go ahead and machine stitch around here, leaving just a small opening so I can turn it back right sides out. Once it's right sides out, let's top stitch all the way around it just to make it look cool, and it's going to have a little bit of strength to it, and then that can later on be captured in the seam allowance. But the button, this is something really cool, and if you haven't studied garment, I'm hopefully showing you something new. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to create what's considered a shank button, meaning a button that has a height to it, like you'd find maybe on a wool coat. And one of the old tricks to doing that is you take a standard button and a matchstick, and as I've been hand sewing this, I'm actually hand sewing it through around the button. So I'm creating a height underneath the button. So let's take a couple more stitches here. So I'm going to drop it through on the top. out, back up. So you just do this maybe 8 or 10 times with a double loop of thread. Okay, and then the last time when you're all set, when you come back up, we're not going to come up into the button. We're going to come up through the bottom, and I'm probably riding your way there, sorry. Even with these new glasses, I got to get a little close. So I'm coming up into the bottom. I'm not going into the button. And at this moment, I'm going to slide the match out. I'm going to grab this thread here, and I'm going to begin tying it like this around the back side of this button, effectively making an elevation on this button. And you notice I didn't take the needle off yet, right? So now that I've done that, I can come right back into the cloth, bring it through, and then I would set my normal knot to finish off that shank. But now I've got this really cool height that I can wrap that loop of elastic around, and it makes things really easy. Now, no good quilt is finished until it is labeled, so don't forget your cool little owl. I have a great t-shirt that says this, "Owl you need is love." Really simple, but I didn't glue it down. I didn't want it to fall off later, so I just stitched it down on this side, and then I left it so you could see that later on I'll come down and stitch this side as well. And then this goes right here, middle of the quilt, so they always see that and they know that you're thinking about them and caring for them. As I said, and I know I went fast, there's a lot of things I wanted to teach you. I want you to build your seam allowances this way first, so that you can come back and sew together all of your columns. And as you're doing it, be careful to watch out for your fidgets, and if you need to get extra fidgets in these long seams, pin them in place carefully so that you can catch them as you go. Once that's done, you're going to put your backing fabric, which is going to be a few inches larger. You're going to put your batting down, and then you're just going to do your stitch in the ditch, and I used a walking foot for that. Once it was all quilted, then at the very end, what I did was one last fun fidget. And the reason I wanted to get you all around to talking about the binding is you can always put great Prairie Points and other fun fidgets in the binding. You see that often. For me, what I did is I wanted to go ahead and put one last something to play with, and it's some of that paracord with a cord lock. So I have this skill. I have to squeeze it and slide it, which I like. I can use these to practice tying bows. Remember, we're building or reminding folks of the skills that are daily skills. But at the end, remember, we wanted this to be portable. So I'm going to open this up, slide this down, and then I can take and make a nice little roll like this. And I left myself just enough cord that I can then come around here and come around there. So I've now got a super cool, super portable fidget quilt to keep myself or anybody in my family that just can't sit still busy while they're enjoying more tutorials right here on Man Sewing. Thanks for being a Man Sewing fan. It's great to have you out there encouraging me to create fantastic new content. If you've missed any of the videos, we've got links for you here and here. And while you're checking those out, make sure you're subscribed. We don't want you to miss any of the action.